Hi everyone, I'm Joel Baird, the General Manager of Missoula Community Access Television, bringing you an interesting edition of Missoula Live. It's kind of like a bulletin, it's kind of like an information show. I'm here with Tyler Gernant. He is the Clerk Recorder and Treasurer for Missoula County. Tyler, thanks so much for taking the time to be on the show.
Absolutely, Joel. Thanks for having me.
You know it. So, the main purpose of our show, right, is to be educational about this year's tax bill. And on the tax bill, we see that there's a lot of different services, institutions, and of course education that's funded through Missoula County and city real estate taxes. And we thought, well, let's go through them so people know what their taxes are paying for anyway.
Absolutely, and I think there's a couple of good primers to have when you're looking at property taxes. The first is the understanding of sort of the process of how you get your bill and what that means. So the first thing I would say is your tax bill represents a calendar year. So this is going to be your 2018 calendar year tax bill, but it's coming out in October. So a lot of people get confused because your 2018 bill comes out in October of 2018. The first half payment is due in November of 2018, but the second half of that is not due until 2019. So
in May of 2019, even.
Yeah. So even though in May you're paying property taxes in May of 2019, that is to address the property taxes that accrued on your property from July to December of the previous year.
Right. That can be confusing for people. Especially if they're doing tax deductions on income property they have or something like that. They pay tax in a calendar year, which involves 2 years. The first payment is for the previous year and the second payment is for the year you're in, and keeps leapfrogging through time.
And it can get kind of confusing, and it's the other thing that's kind of confusing for a lot of people is the tax bill reflects the value of your property as of January 1st of that tax year. So your bill that you're getting in October reflects what exists on your property as of January 1st of 2018. So if you're building a house, if you're subdividing, or if you're merging properties, anything that occurs after that January 1st date is not reflected in your tax bill until the following tax year.
Right, because the assessments take time.
They do.
And then people might say, oh, my house is worth more than that. You know, and they look at an assessed bill and they're like, well, I'm not going to say anything, but I think it's worth a lot more, unless they think it's worth a lot less, which is another story. Right?
Usually for taxes, people think their house is worth not very much. When they go to sell it, it's when it's worth a lot more money.
Right.
And that's also can be a confusing thing. And on your tax bills, there is a reflection of the market value and the taxable value. And some people can get kind of confused by that. But the market value is essentially what the Department of Revenue thinks your property, your house, was worth when the reappraisal cycle happened. This last reappraisal cycle looked at the values as of January 1st of 2016. And so what is reflected on this year's tax bill is what the market value of your property was in January 1st of 2016. And then you multiply that by a tax rate to get your taxable value. The tax rate on a residential is usually 1.35%, although it's, depending on the makeup of the property, can vary. And then to get your actual taxes, you take that taxable value and multiply that by the mill levies levied by the taxing jurisdictions. And so your taxable value times the mill levies is what creates your actual tax burden.
Right. And now people, if you can follow along with that, we're going to give you a diploma at the end of the show. But we see like there are several things going on in different time periods, like what the home is worth. That information might be a little old at the time that you're dealing with a particular tax bill. And then on top of it, as we explained, you're paying your taxes over a period of time that stretches over 2 years. The year you're in, and then 6 months later or so, the year that's following.
Correct.
So that, can add to a lot.
There's a lot of confusion surrounding tax bills. So that's what we're here to address, is try and help alleviate some of that confusion.
And just to add to that layer, are these appraisals done by the county itself or the state?
These are done by the state. So the Department of Revenue has the obligation statutorily to do these assessments. That is primarily a result of the 1972 Montana Constitution, which pulled that duty back from counties. And the reason for that is essentially that there was apparently some abuse of the discretion given when you're doing valuations. And so there was the thought that if this was centralized, if the state of Montana was doing valuations, that there would be less favorable treatment to somebody who was friends with their county assessor.
Oh, I see.
And so it's entirely a state of Montana run thing. In fact, we used to allow address changes to come in on the tax bills, but ultimately what happened is we would send those on to Department of Revenue because of the confusion of us saying, you can send your change of address to us, but we actually don't even have access to the system to change your address.
Right.
So we've now changed that to make it, we refer you directly to the Department of Revenue so you can get that changed right with the people who have access to it.
Yeah, and those folks are, I think, on Palmer Street.
That's correct, yep.
Right now, because I've been up there too. So there's a kind of mixed bag, and the fact that the state is doing the appraisals, and the appraisals are running about 2 years behind cycle, that can lead to some confusion as to how did my property get this valuation. And then sometimes, we'll hear around our city budgeting sessions like, we're waiting from the state to hear how much money there is based on appraised value.
That's correct.
And the reason is it's not in the hands of the county, it's not in the hands of the city, so they're waiting for Helena people to say, okay, this is the amount of revenue you can expect this year.
And that too is by design. I'm maybe getting a little off my
It's
topic
all
here,
right.
but
We've got time.
the state of Montana, the Department of Revenue is required to provide taxing jurisdictions their certified, what's called a certified taxable value at the beginning of August. And that is generally after local jurisdictions have had to budget.
Right.
So they develop their budget sort of blindly, not knowing how much money they're going to have. Again, the idea behind that is that if you don't know how much money you have, you won't spend as much money. And
Interesting. So it's supposed to be based on real need rather than, oh, look, we have all this, we better spend it.
Exactly. And so then they find out how much, jurisdictions find out what their certified taxable value is, and they apply the mill levy calculation to get the amount of money that they actually need to fund services. So it's all by design, although it is kind of a kooky looking design.
Yeah, but sometimes it seems like one hand doesn't know the other, or they're waiting for this and it hasn't happened. And unless you kind of know, and that's really interesting that you gave that background, that the state is involved to provide an even hand, because they're less likely to have any kind of local ties, they would be like blind justice in assessing home value. And then also, when local jurisdictions go to make their budgets, because they don't know precisely what their income is, it's supposed to inspire them to make budgets based on need rather than the need to empty the coffers every year.
Exactly.
Okay. Well, with that in mind, I think it'd be a nice opportunity. What we're providing for folks at home is a look at a tax bill. And this one is, the one we're going to look at is for a piece of property owned by the county anyway.
And this one is owned by the city of Missoula.
Owned by the city of Missoula.
This is kind of confusing because generally speaking, taxable, non-taxable entities don't pay taxes on their property, but there are exceptions, and this is one of those exceptions. This is looking at the MRL park that the city is developing.
And this is relatively new, the MRL Park. It's out by Johnson Street, and it's part of the Bitterroot Spur when you go out there.
And this is the city acquired this property in 2017. And so there are still some leases that the city owns or that the city has on those properties, and so they pass that along. If the use is not taxable, or if the use is taxable, then they still get taxed. So this is, as you can see here, this is where you're going to find, these are the payment coupons that are going to be at the top of your bill.
First half, second half. And then very often, of course, we should point out that if people are purchasing their home on a mortgage, and a lot of people are, if they're purchasing a home, if they don't already have a freehold and enjoying their golden years, these bills are paid by the bank directly to the county. So people, you get them at home, but it's not like you're supposed to necessarily write out a check. And of course, if people have, for instance, for many years, I had a piece of undeveloped land, and it wasn't, I was buying it privately, so I had to pay this bill, and there was always the business of cutting out that coupon, and then you think, don't forget about this 6 months from now.
Exactly, and there is, we started a few years ago, and you can see right here on the tax bills, there's a website that we've set up where we will send you a reminder in May that you've got a tax payment coming up. It's a blanket reminder that goes to everybody. So even if you've paid your second half taxes already, you're still going to get this reminder, but it at least allows you something that gives you a little, kick in the pants to remind you that you need to pay that second half. And you brought up a good point. Your bank, if you have a mortgage on it, typically speaking, your bank will pay the taxes on it.
Yeah.
So if for some reason you forget that and both of you make payments, then the first payment that we receive in our office is the one that we apply towards taxes, and then the second payment we reject and send back. So one way or the other, you're going to get that money back. It's just a matter of if you were the first to pay,
right.
You're going to get it back through your escrow account, and if you're the second to pay, then we'll just send that check right back to you. So
and it would be something really the first-time home buyers like Scott, who's going to become one, or people that are retired, and that's very interesting. That is a different discussion. But people who are on fixed income and looking at tax increases and so on, they really are scanning their bill because they're paying it directly. Their banks are no longer doing it for them. So
exactly, and
there's no piggy bank for some people,
No.
but it's probably more rare, I think.
It's a good reminder too. If you've paid off your mortgage, then your escrow typically disappears, and so you're going to be responsible for these taxes as well.
Right.
So some people kind of forget that that's something that comes up.
Yeah. So when we say escrow, dear viewer, what we mean is the bank is saving the money for you when you pay a mortgage. When you pay that mortgage completely, then you suddenly have to become the piggy bank, and you don't want to be shocked when you get a tax bill. Now, Tyler, I was a little surprised about the amount. I was like, why did he choose, what for the average homeowner would be a large one, but I understand, we didn't want to pick out any person and pick apart their bill, whether it was mine or yours or soon to be Scott's. So this is a good compromise, and I think a lot of people at home would recognize most people in Missoula are not paying $15,000 in property tax per year.
No, this is an exceptional. First of all, this is a commercial tax rate, so it's higher than a residential tax rate. Second of all, if you look at, you can look down at the very bottom here, on your tax bill. In the bottom right-hand corner here is what I was talking about with the market value and taxable value. And so because this is undeveloped land, the part of this that's being taxed is this $457,000.
Of the real estate.
So that's the value of just the land. And if you multiply the taxable rate times the market value, you get the taxable value. A $460,000 house is generally more than the median home in Missoula, but it's also commercial, and so its tax rate is much higher than a residential property.
Right. So, and the purpose of our getting together really is not to discuss the rate. That's another story.
That's
for
a legislative thing,
people at another time. It's not my job, and it's not Tyler's job either. So, what we wanted to do, I think, is go through it and see all the things that these taxes are paying for, just so people know.
Exactly, and sometimes it can get confusing. So, like I said, the top half up here is your coupons. There's the first coupon, the second coupon. These have perforated edges, so you'll be able to tear those off. In the past, you've had to cut them off, so that was an improvement for this year. And then you get into the real meat of what you're looking at here, and this is the general tax detail. So it's going to be broken down into 4 categories. The first is the city, then the county, then you've got local schools over here, and then you've got special districts and state schools. The city generally only lists out the one generic. It's not just the general fund. There's also other elements that go into that, including the aquatics bond is getting paid off through that. County or city employee health insurance premiums are paid for out of this through a permissive medical levy. And then that's also the general fund. So this incorporates basically everything that goes to the city that is a levied fund. And by levied, I mean it is based just on your taxable value is how they determine how much you owe. Then you go into the county. The county separates out a lot of things.
Yeah.
So, if you want to just go one by one, county aging services is the aging services. They receive some tax money. Public works bridges. That is essentially a fund that goes towards maintaining all of the county-maintained bridges in Missoula County, which are quite a few.
And the county's 2,000 square miles plus, right?
There's a ton of open space, and there's quite a few bridges. So this is really probably not enough to maintain them all. in the best shape, but we do what we can with what we have. So.
Right.
Capital improvements is, again, that's a fund that is used to fund capital improvements within the county, and that includes things like buildings, technology, things like that.
And do departments, like in the city world, departments, participate in the CIP, the Capital Improvements Program, and to a degree it's competitive and need-based at the same time,
Yep.
where departments say, wow, we've had this piece of equipment, it's ancient, they make much better, newer, cheaper ones, and so on like that.
Absolutely, and that is definitely part of what the Capital Improvements Fund goes towards. Community and Planning Services is to fund that department, which anybody who's done any kind of land work in Missoula, if you do a subdivision or anything like that, you go through Community and Planning Services.
Right.
There's really a whole lot more than that they do for the county. They're a
Yeah.
pretty large department, but that goes to funding them.
Because they also write grants like CBG, that one.
Yep, CDBG.
Community block development
Yes.
grants, and they're often huge,
Yeah.
hundreds of thousands of dollars, and they often go to very important, community, human need services.
And so that's an important one. The Community Assistance Fund, it used to be for, half a century was called the Poor Fund. And that got changed in the legislature, so it's now called the Community Assistance Fund, but it goes towards helping a lot of the poor members of our community provide those social services. Child care provider training, this is a different description than what you would have seen on previous bills. It used to be called community daycare, but that made it sound like
the county had its own daycare.
Had its own daycare, and that is not what that fund
So many
does.
people would wish that when they're in a certain time of life. My goodness.
So this more accurately describes that fund, which is to provide training for daycares
That's a
and child
great
care
idea.
providers. So district courts funds the district courts in Missoula. We have 4, soon to become 5 departments in Missoula, so there's a pretty healthy need there.
Yeah.
County Extension Service, again, is where you would get, information about plants, things like that.
Oh, it's wonderful.
It
I
is.
call, and say there's spots on my apricots, what's going on. And they also do a lot with youth and youth training, in those areas of agriculture and that kind of thing.
And they do quite a bit as well. County Fair helps to go fund the county fair. We're admissions price free now, so you don't pay to get into the fair, and this is one of the ways that helps get paid for. The county general fund is a lot like the city general fund. That can be used for anything that the county commissioners determine and is within the scope of county government. So this is sort of what you use to fill in the needs in the other areas. And there's also some places like the county attorney's office, the treasurer's office, the clerk and recorder's office. Those are all funded by the general fund. Grants.
And elections?
Elections is also funded by the general fund.
I was going to ask, because I was just interviewing Dana, and I was out at the fairgrounds where the election office has been set up, during the midterms.
And so that's another great example. So a lot of the sort of nuts and bolts of county services are funded through that general fund.
Yeah.
The grants and community services is, again, there's a grants department, and that goes to help backfill some of the needs that they have in that department.
Yeah.
County jail debt service. So we, back in the 90s, we funded.
What's it then? The jail on Mullen.
The detention center was built with this. This is a bond that exists for this will be on this year's tax bills and next year's tax bills, and then it will disappear because it has been paid off. So that is soon to come off. The judgment levy is for the county got into a lawsuit about a subdivision.
The subdivision.
About Glen Eagle subdivision.
Right.
So this is going to pay off the settlement of that subdivision lawsuit. The county library, that is the general fund that goes towards funding the operations of the library.
Yeah,
So it's
not the new one.
Not
Everyone's
the new library.
working. That levy had passed, and then everyone's working on fundraising, to make it the best building it can be.
Exactly.
So this is operation for the library.
This is just the operations for the library, and then the library GO bonds, that stands for general obligation bonds. That's the voted in one right there.
$47.18.
So that goes to fund the building of the library.
Yeah.
The LTGO 2017 bonds, those are long-term general obligation bonds, and those were used for a number of things, but primarily the renovation of the courthouse for Missoula County. County mental health treatment is what it seems, provides mental health treatment across the county. The County Historical Museum is out at the Fort Missoula And that
We know
funds-
them well. They're
Indeed.
a good MCAT partner.
They're-
And we partnered with them, for instance, to do a summer camp.
Oh, cool.
About Montana history. So we know that. We know it pretty well. The folks at home may not.
It's a great place, and the Fort Missoula, it's right in that Fort Missoula Regional Park, and
Yeah.
there's a really cool museum that has changing exhibits, so
Yeah.
it's a really cool place to go out and visit. The County Parks and Recreation, again, funds county parks and recreation
Surprise,
programs.
surprise.
County permissive medical levy, this is the same as the city one that we talked about to fund
Yeah.
employee health insurance premiums. City-county planning is for the joint planning that goes on between the city and the county. County property and liability insurance it funds what you would think of as like your home insurance, but for the county.
Right.
We have to fund or insure our buildings. We're self-funded and self-administered in terms of our risk insurance, and this goes to funding that department and funding the liability insurance. County Public Safety Fund is usually used by the Sheriff's Office to backfill some of their needs. That is the primary funding vehicle that the Sheriff's Office has. Relationship Violence Services, again, that funds that department that provides services for relationship violence. County Search and Rescue, again, search and rescue. If someone gets lost or something.
You read about it all the time.
Indeed, and Search and Rescue in Sealy, that is primarily funding the same operation that they have, but they have it up in Sealy.
Right.
County Substance Abuse Prevention programs, that's how they get their funding in the county. County Technology Fund does fund some of the technology upgrades that we do, some of the computers and things like that. And then County Weed Control is primarily to go out and spray noxious weeds and do things like that to help control especially noxious weeds in Missoula County.
Yeah.
So the county breaks out your services quite a bit. So
That's really true. I mean, I think, we probably wouldn't have to go through the school bit by bit, but we see here, I mean, the total of local school is about twice everything else. So it shows, I assume like this is a result of, a historical commitment, and like these bills do not change in shape except perhaps for general obligation or something. They don't change on a dime. Like I would imagine relationship violence services is relatively new.
It is, yep.
Like if you said that 40 years ago, people are like, what is that? It'd be this completely foreign idea, maybe even 20 years ago. But the commitment to schools is very, very strong, isn't it?
It is, and it's something that, generally speaking, these don't change what shows up on your tax bill. Those are, you don't necessarily get a whole lot of information out of that. To get that, you would need to go to the Office of Public Instruction's website, and they have much more detailed information about where that money is being spent at the school level. One of the newer ones that's on there is the Building Reserve Fund, and you can see that right in this. It's this 161
I see that,
for elementary and 261 for high school. That really was a function of a legislative change that happened a few years ago in a way to try and alleviate sort of, the $150 million bonds that passed a few years ago.
Yes.
This is a reserve fund to help fund some of those ongoing maintenance issues at schools that weren't happening because there just wasn't a funding source for it. So that was an improvement, I would say.
Right. And then what people would notice is the ones that say debt SVC, debt service on both a high school and an elementary level. And is that the debt service on those multi-million-dollar bonds that passed a couple of years ago?
That's primarily where they're located. But again, I would say schools have a very complex way of budgeting, and it's not as transparent on your tax bill as it is on their website. So I would say if you go to the Office of Public Instruction, you'll find a much more comprehensive, detailed breakdown of where your tax dollars are going by school district.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of hard. We at one point were going to try and pull out that debt service that was associated with those bonds, but it just gets so tricky with how they calculate out their mill levies that it would have been
added
really
more
impossible.
Confusion. You mean to try to put it in a bill like this?
It would have just been very difficult to actually put the correct amount in. So we just encourage everybody to go to the OPI website to find that information.
Okay. And something that's interesting people may not think about is the state school.
Indeed. So this
and
is
equalization. And I'm jumping ahead in my mind thinking, that was like a constitutional attempt to make sure that the rich counties' kids aren't having a great education and the poor counties' kids are having a deficient education.
That's exactly it. It's been the subject of a number of lawsuits over the last 30 years in Montana. This is part of the attempt to equalize funding across schools so that you don't have, and it varies quite a bit. At times when the Bakken was going really strong, eastern Montana schools had a lot of money and were contributing more probably to the equalization fund than they were getting out.
Oh, I see.
But it varies based on how the economy in that particular region is doing as to whether you're getting more money from the equalization or putting more money into it. But that's the idea, is equalizing education across the state. One thing I would point out too, this is, it's been the subject of a lot of debates here. The urban renewal districts, those are what you would think of as tax increment financing districts or TIF districts. This shows, so all of the numbers that we've been looking at here are the taxes that don't go towards that urban renewal district. They're what you'd consider the base taxes on that property. The urban renewal district line is the money that actually goes into that TIF district to be used for economic development. And funding.
And did you use the word TIF?
I did.
Hear that? So just to explain to the dear viewer, and who's ever still with us,
yeah.
it's not like,
Sorry if I've
lost.
lost.
We can make this into an animation. Everyone's going to understand. This is for people that are like super interested. That stands for Tax Increment Financing TIF. To explain that function, I think it'd be really hard.
I think it'd be a difficult load to carry.
Yes.
But if I were to give the 30-second view, when you establish a TIF district, it's because there's an area in town that is underserved and it doesn't have economic development going on it right then. So the idea is you establish the TIF district and it establishes the baseline value of all the property in that district. Anything that accrues above and beyond that during the life of that district goes into funding things for infrastructure improvements. So that's where you get things like you extend the sewer, you put in sidewalks. All of those are things that TIF money gets used for to help improve the area to make it more likely that someone will want to come in and develop it.
Yeah, so that it's a kind of boost up for an area so that it can become more economically successful in the future. And then that money, if you want to look at it that way, extended to the district is then repaid in a higher tax base down the road.
Exactly, and so a good example of this actually, I think a lot of people tend to think of these districts as never expiring, but the airport TIF district out in the county just expired this year, and so that money, all of that economic development that occurred over the last 20 years is now contributing directly into the county's general fund coffers.
Oh, yeah.
So it does eventually pay off, but in the meantime you have to pay off the infrastructure that led to the development, and that's what this money does.
Okay, I think that's pretty good. Now, a lot of people know the bus is free.
Exactly, Mountain Line Urban Transportation, that's what this funds. This is a special district because not everybody in Missoula County pays it. There is a specified service area for Mountain Line and only those people within that service area when this district was created. So they're obviously, over time, Mountain Line shifts where buses go, but those those district boundaries didn't change. So this is what goes to help funding one of many sources.
Right, and I think a lot of people, well, we're editorializing, but I think a lot of people saw the value, and this is relatively new. And again, if 40 years ago people said, what? Not only is there a bunch of buses instead of 3, but they're actually free, they would be very, very surprised. But I think anyone that takes a moment to think, let's say if someone is in the class of working poor, you got to get to that job, and then to just have an automobile, and the amount, like if we're defining working poor by minimum wage, that is not only not going to pay for housing, it's not going to pay for a car to get you to the job.
No, and I mean,
the cars are too expensive and the repairs too expensive.
I think from a greater social good, in addition to that too, you're talking about Missoula that tends to get air inversions. Taking cars off the road helps reduce our inversions and our smog. So there's community benefits in addition to individualized community benefits.
Yeah, we don't mean to editorialize.
No,
we're just here talking, that's all. And this is new, and that's the only reason I thought, well, some people got it there because of those perceived benefits, that's all.
Exactly. And so this, where I talked about this general tax detail up on the top half of the bill, those are all the funds that are funded by mill levies. So those are things that if there's a levy that is associated directly with your market value, that's how you pay those. If you look down in the special assessments, this is generally where we put those special districts, similar to the general tax detail. These are special districts, but these are funded not necessarily by determining the value of your property, but by a whole host of different options. So for instance, sewer mains is one. You generally will pay a fee directly associated with a sewer. City park and city road districts, those are sometimes determined by the linear square footage of your road frontage for your property. There's a water conservation district, which is not on this bill, but is on a lot of bills, and that's determined by your usage, and so they measure how much water you're actually using, and you get into a tier based on that. And so these are all ones that are not necessarily determined by your market value, but sometimes they're based on use, sometimes they're based off of repaying a bond. This is where your special improvement district assessments come in.
So if you live in one, and then you may not. These assessments, are they controlled by the state or are they locally controlled?
These are all locally controlled.
Okay.
So this is, and you'll see like the ROSP county open space, this is where those 2006 open space bonds appear on your tax bill. They appear down here because even though they are based off value, there are certain properties that don't pay them within that district based off of being an agricultural property or something. Same with Fort Missoula Park's open space. That was an open space bond as well, even though it went to fund a park.
I think everyone is amazed that that was one of the first of the larger bonds that seemed to pass without a lot of fanfare or anything. I think it was $42 million at the time, and everyone was like, gee, I wonder if I could, what can I get? But the park itself is very impressive.
It is a
It's
very
pretty
impressive
amazing.
park, and so we've got a gem for Missoula.
And it's designed to be kind of like an economic attractor for the region where people will come in and spend a fair amount of money in Missoula playing a whole series of tournaments there.
Yeah. And so then you'll see down towards the bottom of that special assessments, you get the actual dollar amount for each. For general taxes, those get split up into two halves, and they're generally pretty equal. They're maybe off one, if you have an uneven number.
Penny or...
Yeah, you may be off by 1 penny. These ones can vary quite a bit, and so in some cases you actually do pay more. It doesn't look like on this bill there's any of those, but there are some special districts where you pay the entire amount in the first half, or you pay the entire amount in the second half. And so that's generally where you're going to find the difference between if your first half payment is more or less than your second half payment, is in these special assessments. Down here then you see your general taxes. That'll tell you which levy district you're in, which also then will tell you what school district you're in. Your mill levy is the actual levies assessed by all of the taxing jurisdictions, and then it gives you your total taxes due. If you have, for instance, back taxes that are owing, there will be in this box down here, since the city of Missoula has paid their property taxes on this parcel.
Right, good for them.
Thankfully, there's no message in here, but down here you would see a message saying how much your delinquent taxes are, as well as a phone number that you can call. Those are calculated through the payment date for the first half payment. So if there's interest owing, if you make that payment before November 30th, then you're fine. If you make it after November 30th, you'd need to call our office to get an updated payment amount.
Right, because it's calculated every day or
It calculates
something.
every day, yep.
I have known some sad stories along those lines where people wanted to pay, and then it seems like, well, okay, the county's really brutal, but you guys are also stuck in a pretty rigid set of procedures, because as soon as there's wiggle room, then who knows, it's very political. Who's going to get wiggled by what? So if everyone is not treated exactly the same, there's a problem.
A great example of that is Northwestern Energy paid their bills late this year. They paid them 1 day late. You get a penalty assessed for paying late.
Right.
And so Northwestern paid about $150,000 in penalty for paying 1 day late. And so they, naturally, as anybody would, they wanted to see if there was a way around that. But there just isn't.
How can there be? Because then you start making exceptions for big business and all kinds of to-doing. I mean, it's probably a good thing for people to remember. A lot of people don't want to pay their taxes, so the people paying by hand, anyone that spent time in the courthouse around these dates, November 30th, May 31st, or whatever, there's a certain heat in the air. There's something going on, you know.
There is, and it's particularly bad afterwards because some people will come in and want to pay, December 1st. And
Right.
of course, by that point, penalty
There's
is
a little,
assessed.
it's changed, and they've written a check and all kinds of, I've witnessed some tragedies, but you guys have probably had it all.
We
you
get
know.
quite a bit. We do accept the postmark date. There is an Attorney General's opinion that says we can accept the postmark date. So if you come in and you for some reason you don't want to sit in our office to make your tax payment on the 30th, as long as you get it in the mail and it's postmarked as of November 30th, we're going to honor that postmark
Oh,
date.
see, that is probably good for people to know. I have no idea, really knowing what percentage of people are in this position where they're paying tax directly and not through the soft escrow of their mortgage company that's saving the money for them, building it right out of the mortgage, and paying it on time like clockwork and so on. And I think we didn't mention it in the program, but before we started recording this show, I was saying that a lot of people who are renting, and I assume their numbers are going to grow in
Yeah.
Missoula given the price of housing and the number of rental
moving in.
units we see being built. If you're a renter, you guys never see this bill. It's something your land people, lord and ladies, are dealing with. So I thought, it'd be nice for people who are paying rent. And, often, at least when I was younger and renting, the landlords would say, well, they keep raising the taxes. Sorry, young fella, but you got to pay $15 more a month or whatever. And I really never understood what that meant. All of the services that we're listing here, and also all the educational elements as well.
Yeah, and I think it's good to note too that you can go look up, tax bills are public record, so you can go
Yeah.
look up your landlord's tax bill and see exactly what he's paying in
Oh,
taxes.
you mean in case you're like, oh, wait a minute, I don't buy that
Yeah,
story
exactly.
that it's
You'll-
gone up 10%, so the rent goes up 10%.
And you can go see historically what that tax bill has been. We have actual copies of the tax bills for the last, I think, 3 years on our
I
website,
guess
3 or
that's
4.
true. Like when you go to that website, like the county information, you put in an address, and you can see what the taxes are and how up to date they are.
Yep,
Things
and
like that.
if you go to, it's MissoulaTaxes.us, and you can look it up by address, you can look it up by owner name or tax ID number. And so there's lots of different ways. You can also go to MissoulaProperty.us, and that's a map. So you can actually then go on the map and visually find your property and then click on that, and there's a tax button on that that'll bring you to the same place. So
Oh, interesting.
there's a lot of different ways to find it.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily the most intuitive, but once you get there, if you play around with it for a while, you can usually find a tax bill pretty quickly.
Yeah, and a tax bill is a really interesting reflection on local democracy in action. I think, on a federal level, people get very confused. I mean, look how confusing our story is just for Missoula
It's
County.
hard, yeah.
But when things happen and people go to the polls and say, all right, let's have a new library building or let's have an expanded park, boom, you're going to feel it in the pocketbook eventually. And this is the system. Some people will say, they keep raising this tax and it's really bad, and they have very good arguments for that. And as I mentioned, you and I are not in charge of any of this at all. But it is democracy in action, where the majority wins and the minority that says everything's good as it is, or, I'm on a fixed income, I've just had enough of improvements. That's another timely message. I think go to the polls.
Yeah.
There's
Absolutely.
stuff on the polls about spending or not spending money right now. And people have till November 6th.
I would strongly encourage everyone to vote. So I
Yeah.
think that's an important element of exercising your voice.
Yeah.
And you don't get to have a say if you don't vote because you didn't
You
exercise.
weren't there.
Yeah, you didn't get a
The
chance.
democracy,
So.
they say, belongs to those who show up, and it's only once a year. So. But Tyler, is there anything you want to add? Like, we have been gabbling on, and I think that's fine. For instance, I was going to say, if somebody feels like this tax bill is wrong, what redress does the county offer them?
So the most important thing that I would say is if your tax bill is wrong, then you should call and talk to us about it or come in and talk to us about it.
People set up appointments. I've seen them do that.
People do, and I will go through and I explain tax bills to folks. You can go on the state's website. You can, that MissoulaProperty.us also has a button that says CAMA, C-A-M-A, and if you click on that button, that will show you the characteristics of your property as it's been assessed. The most common mistake that we see is that the square footage of a house is wrong. So you'll be assessed for 10,000 square feet. This is,
it's a big house.
I don't know whose house this is, but I'm just pulling numbers out. Say you're assessed for 10,000 square feet, but you really only have 7,500 square feet.
Yeah.
That's going to make a big difference in your valuation. And so if you come in and you talk to us about it, we can correct that, and we can correct it for up to 5 years in the past. So
that's really something.
So it's important that if your property information is incorrect, that's where we can fix it. If it's just the value, if your information is correct, then generally by the time you get your tax bill, it's too late for that year. But we recommend filing something called an AB 26 with the Department of Revenue.
Again, this has to go to Helena, right?
You
guys are caught in the middle.
It goes to Palmer here locally, but ultimately it's Helena that's that is in control of that, and so they will go through and they will do a reassessment of your property, and they'll reappraise it if it looks like there is an incorrect valuation.
Right, and enough people had done that. I think some of the brouhaha this summer, with the Sudden City tax increase, was that a number of people had successfully protested their assessment.
That's correct.
Enough to make a big kind of like whoa,
a big difference for the city.
For the city.
Yeah.
So the mechanism is there, and it's not like someone's going to suppress it. Obviously, because they say, oh, we're the state, go soak your head. They don't. They actually listen, and things change.
They absolutely do, and I would give the one caution that if the information is correct, there are instances where your value does go higher. So it's not always going to be going down. But if there's something wrong with the information on your appraisal, that's when it's definitely time to take a look at it, because you want to get that correct so you're not paying for something that you're not receiving.
Yeah. And then on another note too, often I went and banged on doors. MCAT's going to move into the new library. What do you call that? Disclosure. And so in my spare time, I was very excited, to get out the vote in favor of the mill 2 years ago. And a number of homes I stopped at when the people were older, they said, well, look, we'd love for you to have a new library, but, things are tight. I'm not making any more money, and the taxes keep going up. This town has gone from dogs sleeping in the main street, to a lot more fancy town. And I was like, I've been here 35 years. I believe you. It really has. I'm kind of shocked. It's so fancy around here. If people are older than a certain age, do they get a tax break?
Not based on age. There is one based on income.
Okay.
So there is, regardless of your age, there is an income-based property assistance program. It's called Property Taxpayer Assistance, PTAP, and you apply for that at the Palmer office of the Department of Revenue here in Missoula. If you meet within those income brackets, then you can get an exemption on the first $200,000 of your home.
Wow, yeah.
You can get an exemption between, I think it's 30% and all the way up to 100%. If your income is low enough, you can get it to where you're not paying any property taxes. But I would specify too, there's a difference in those special assessments. A lot of those special assessments, you don't get the assistance for property taxpayers. So if you are part of an SID, which is somebody put in sidewalks or they put in a road and the community came together and decided we would pay for that jointly. Those are not necessarily going to go away just because you're receiving property taxpayer assistance. And so you'll still get that bill and you'll still have to pay it.
Gotcha. Because only that which is controlled by the state, they can say, okay, this is under our control, but because the SIDs or the other special assessments are locally generated, the state has no control over it. And I guess right now, special assessments have no appeal process for people?
They have an appeal process, but it's appealing directly to the taxing jurisdiction. So for instance, the road district on this bill that we've been looking at in the park district, those are both functions of the city of Missoula's government. And so you would appeal that to the city of Missoula. But there are numerous instances where, for instance, forest fire protection is run through the DNRC, and so you would appeal that to them.
Wow,
it's the jurisdiction that implements the fee that is responsible for determining whether or not you're eligible for relief, or whether there was a mistake that caused you to pay something you shouldn't have.
Yeah. Are there outfits that do this service for people? Like in my mother's neighborhood, which is on Long Island, the taxes, they're 6 times the amount they are here.
Oh, yeah.
But some people use like a service that looks at your tax bill and does the runaround. I don't know if there is such a thing.
I'm not, to be honest with you, that generally is what our office does.
Right, so you guys are doing it. It
Yeah.
hasn't commercialized yet.
No.
You're looking at the tax bill, looking at the people's plight and say, wow, okay, well, if your income's only this, or have you tried this, or go here and do that. So you're offering that kind of concrete advice for tax relief.
We do, and we do that quite frequently. In addition to that, there's a section on the tax bill too where it'll show if you have a tax lien on your property. Those in the state of Montana, those get sold to third parties most of the
Yes.
time, and so if you haven't paid your taxes 3 years after that lien is sold, or the lien was initially placed on the property, I should say, then you can lose your property. We've never, in the time that I've been the treasurer, we've made a really concerted effort to contact homeowners to make sure that somebody who is living in a residence is not going to lose their home for unpaid property taxes. And there's a number of charities we can help connect people to. There's some individuals that just will help that we know, and so we'll help connect people. We've never in my time lost an occupied residence.
Yeah. Wasn't there like a trailer park and somebody paid all of the tax or something?
That's happened. There was a GoFundMe campaign this last cycle. Yeah. So those are mobile home taxes. Those are going to be different than what we've been looking at here with real estate taxes. Okay. But so those are a different story. But you have
But I remember reading in the paper like somebody stepped in and paid the whole bill or something.
That happened in 2014, and that particular individual, that's not something that's ongoing for sure.
Right.
But there are people who will step in and pay mobile home taxes that we are aware of, and we can reach out to them and see if they'd be willing to help. Yeah. They generally don't like their names to be known publicly because they don't want to get all inundated with requests.
Yeah,
but,
sure.
If you
That's
really
pretty
truly
wild,
are
though. I
struggling.
kind of like that. That sounds so neighborly,
It's
right?
it's such a Missoula thing.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, we really do look out for each other here, and that's just another example of community members helping other community members without any expectation of anything in return.
Yeah. Well, anything you want to add? I know, like for the 2 people that are left, you're going to get a gold star for staying with us and learning. Something about the world of taxes.
The only thing I would maybe add is the back of the tax bill this year. I don't know if I can actually get to it, but the back of the tax bill has that formula for how you get from market value to taxable value to taxes assessed.
Oh, good.
It also has a breakdown of the percentage of a general tax bill I should say a typical tax bill in the city of Missoula and a typical tax bill in the county of Missoula. For what percentage of your money goes where. And so, again, in the city of Missoula, it's generally about 26% of the taxes go towards the city. It's somewhere around 19% goes to the county, and somewhere in the neighborhood of 38 or 39% goes to local schools.
Right.
And so we put that on the tax bill, on the back of the tax bill this year, so people could actually see where their tax dollars are going by jurisdiction as well.
Oh, see, that's good. I mean, I know often people say, well, in terms of taxes, it's public safety, police, fire and roads, and it's education and parks, and then everything else, and you see it on the bill, I think, just from looking over your shoulder in this time, that is the case, but there are amenity or, bonds that create amenities and so on.
For sure, and the things that are funded by tax dollars are pretty substantial. So it's really amazing to think how much you pay in taxes for what you get back, because it is quite a bit.
And we can't editorialize people. I've just found, too, that many hands do make light work. If you're doing something yourself, all right, good luck to you, but it just seems harder. Well, Tyler, thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you, Joel. I appreciate it. Yeah, it's great to be here.
And thank you, dear viewer, for taking the time. Once again, we've been visiting with Tyler Gernant. He is the clerk and recorder and treasurer for Missoula County, and he came by today to just detail the county tax bill, that is also the city tax bill, that all of us are going to enjoy seeing at some time in our lives. So for MCAT, I'm Joel Baird. Thanks for watching.